You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for hitting that play button. This is the Dave Bullis Podcast. Almost forgot the name of the podcast there for a second. So as you probably saw by the episode title, this is the final episode. No, it's not fake news. I've decided to take a step back from doing a lot of this stuff. And so I'm going to take down the podcast and all my social media at the end of this year, 2019. So if there's an episode that you want, that you may have want, or want to look at the backlog, I would download that as soon as possible, because at the end of this month, December 2019, I am taking this all down. I started this podcast in 2014, and, I think this is a good time to end it. I want to say thank you to everyone who has been here since square one. There's actually listeners who started way back then, 5 years ago. I started this because I was so frustrated with a lot of things. Couldn't get things made, couldn't even get a podcast started with people, and we had a whole studio to do it in and couldn't even do that. So I decided to start my own podcast, and it's been okay. Wasn't as popular as I thought it was going to be. But this week's guest actually, his podcast is pretty popular, so we'll ask him where I went wrong. But if you're still interested in listening to a filmmaking podcast, there's two recommendations. One is Alex Ferrari's podcast, Indie Film Hustle. It's the #1 film podcast. I also reference Making Movies is Hard. That's another podcast I talk about in this episode. Also, there is the Film Productivity Podcast with Carter. That's another podcast I would recommend. Those podcasts are all still going strong, and I recommend one of those podcasts. I also just want to give a shout out to Tom Ribeiro or Ribeiro. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. I want to say, I was going to have him on the podcast. He had a podcast called Second Class Cinema, and he just produced a new movie called Stray. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it work before the podcast ended, but I'm going to put a link in the show notes for his new movie that he produced. So I want to give a shout out to him as well. And again, I want to say thank you everybody for listening for all this time. So without further ado, on this week's episode is the man, the myth, the legend himself. He's been on here like 4 or 5 times before. His new book, Filmtrepreneur, a book about how indie filmmakers can make their films into a profitable business, is out now. He also has written Shooting the Mob, which was his tale of making a movie for a mobster. And he's also his next movie, On the Corner of Ego and Desire, which he guerrilla shot at Sundance, is also going to be out next month, which is January 2020. Man, this year went by fast. So without further ado, this is the final episode with guest Alex Ferrari.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Dave, it is my honor to be back on the show, sir. Thank you so much for having me, man.
We're like on the SNL record now. I think you were the most repeated guest that has come on here.
Man, I am honored. I am honored for that, sir. Thank you very much. I don't how many times have I been on the show? Like at least 3, if not a little bit more.
I could have sworn this is 4 or 5.
It might be. We'd have to go back to the records because you are a prolific podcaster, sir. You have hundreds of episodes, sir. So you are prolific.
Yeah, and what's funny is, I mentioned this to you before, is I started before you, and then you just caught up like that. I was like, man, this guy Ferrari is coming up fast, man. And all of a sudden, you have more episodes than I do. I'm like, Jesus, this guy's a maniac.
It was a very interesting time when we met. For everybody who doesn't know, Dave and I were part of a mastermind group back in the day with some other podcasters in the space. Scott McMahon from Film Trooper, Jason Buff from Film Academy, and Christopher from Film Festival Secrets. And we all would meet once a week, I think it was, or at least once every other week or something like that.
Yep, once a week.
And we would talk shop. We would just okay, what's working for you? How can I help you? It was a really cool time. But I remember when I showed up, I think it was Scott who first reached out to me. He was like, "Who the hell are you? Like, why are you everywhere? And you just launched. How is this a thing? What are you doing?"
He goes, "Dave, you got to meet this guy named Alex Ferrari. His marketing is on point, and this, that, and the other thing." And I'm like, "Oh, awesome!" And then that was the beginning of the end for me. I was like, "Oh, this guy's going to steamroll me in no time flat." Not that it's hard, but
look. We have different flavors, sir. I always say that to people. I'm like, look, I can't compete with Dave. Dave can't compete with me. It with just different flavors, man. There's just different flavors of the same wonderful pie that is the film industry, sir.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. I'm kind of like that old mom and pop shop. That's me, making the same ice cream since like 1942.
But it's good ice cream, sir. It's good ice cream. Come on. You have an animated logo, sir. I don't have an animated logo. You have an animated logo. Someone drew that. I don't know if it was you or somebody else, but someone drew that logo. It's fantastic.
Somebody drew that for me. They were like, "Hey, do you want a logo made?" And I said, "Sure," because nobody wants to see my ugly mug on a on a Twitter. Trust me, on Tinder. I've learned a long time ago nobody wants to see my face, so that's why.
Wow.
So that's why I'm like an animated character everywhere. Trust me, you can only get swiped left so much, Alex, before you realize maybe this isn't my thing. Maybe
I'm so grateful that I was able to get married prior to the whole app thing. I don't even understand the whole Tinder thing. I know I sound like an old fart right now, but I get it. I understand the concept of it. I think it would have been very cool for me when I was younger to do it. But I'm glad that I don't have to deal with that. I'm glad that I've been married for many, many years. And my wife and I both look at each other like, can you imagine doing that now? I'm like, yeah, I don't even want to think about it. It's fucking brutal. It's brutal.
Oh, yes, it is. And if you ever want to hear some funny Tinder date stories, Alex, I have them.
I'm sure you, Dave, any story coming from you, Dave, is fantastic.
Well, thank you. You always know what's going to happen. It's always going to be, I take you on a nice journey, right? And then there seems to be a little bit of hope. And you're like, oh, this is going to be a nice story, like something you could tell your family. But then it takes this deep, dark turn into and it becomes like a twisted Coen Brothers film. And all of a sudden you're like, why? Where the hell did this come from? And you're like, well,
pretty much. It's that's kind of the way it works with you, sir. It definitely and ends up with a goat in the back seat. I don't know how you get the goat in the back seat, but it always ends up with a goat in the back seat.
Yeah, that's like my thing. That's like my calling card. So Alex, speaking of you being everywhere, every time I turn around, I see something new you're launching. Last time you were here, you did shooting for the Mob, which by the way was fantastic.
Thank you. You read it. Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I did make sure to pick up a copy. It was actually, I think I was halfway done when we had you on the podcast last time, and I finished it after a couple days after we had you on. Lots of twists and turns, and it actually was something where I'm like, well, I know Alex is alive because I talked to him. But I'm wondering how this thing turns out because he has to get out of this some way. So
right, it is you want to talk about horror stories? That book is that story is it's an like I say, it's an allegory of how not to follow your filmmaking dream. It's definitely it's a rough journey, but it's my origin story. It is part of my origin story. That's when I was bitten by the radioactive spider, though I did not turn into a superhero. But that is my origin story, without question.
Yeah, and you and I have a similar story like that where people hear these stories and they're like, but didn't either one of you look at these warning signs and be like, holy crap, something's really wrong?
No, the thing is that you and I both were infected by this thing called filmmaking. It's a disease. It is something that once you get it, there is no vaccination. There is no way to get rid of it. The only treatment for it is being on set and actually making movie. And it goes dormant. It does go dormant sometimes, but then it flares up. So then you start itching. It's really bad. So it is something that we all dealt with, and that also at the early stages of the infestation, in the early stages, in the incubation process, you become delusional, and the younger you are, the more delusional you are. It's just something that happens with that specific disease. So it is. I was infected very, very heavily in that at that time of my life.
Yes, and because I think that's the thing. If you have success when you're young, and your ego just grows like 25 times the size, and you're like, I can control this, I can do this. When it becomes people management, that's when the ego, even if you're talented, like people management is a whole nother skill set, and and trying to weather those storms. And you and I both had people that we had to manage who were either insane or psychopaths or whatever, or, however you want to slice this. And we're like, okay, why do they keep going and saying yes? Oh, because they're riding on a boat that's their own ego, and it's like all of a sudden they just it's like
it's an insane business, man. We're in an insane business. We all have to be a little delusional to be in this business in the first place, but why we're still here, I don't know. Why do we keep doing this? I don't know. I really don't. I've asked myself many times in my life, in my career, why do I keep doing this? Like, why am I still a filmmaker? Why? It's a mistress that is just horrible to you. She's like that girl that is gorgeous, and every once in a while she invites you over because she just broke up with her boyfriend, and you think there's some hope, and then all of a sudden the boyfriend shows up and kicks you out. Like it's a horrible relationship being in the film industry. It really is. It's horrible. It's really, really horrible. But you live for the moments that it's not horrible, and that is the disease.
Yes, I think that's a great way to put it. And I'm sure everyone listening to this who was ever thinking about making a film is like, yeah, I can't wait to make one now. I have to listen to Dave and Alex. All right.
Well, I mean, listen, if they've ever listened to me, they should be scared to death. But I always tell people who listen to me, I was like, look, follow your dream, but don't be an idiot. And that's the best advice I could give you. Follow your dream. If it's something you want to do, if there's stories you want to tell, do it, but just be smart about it. Just don't be idiotic about it and ego driven about it. And that's very difficult in our business, without question.
Yes, and that is a key point. And that's something too. You and I were talking about beforehand, which actually led to this latest recording. Because you're everywhere, and because you're still in the film business, and you're just rocking and rolling it. You have two things. You have another book out, which is Rise of the Filmtrepreneur: How to Turn Independent Film into a Profitable Business. And two, there's a movie out right now called Ferrari versus Ford. I say no. It's Ferrari versus Distributor. That's the movie you want to see.
Ferrari versus Distributor. Yes, that is yes, it's a much better movie, I hear.
and when I saw that in Variety, I'm like, my God, this guy has made it. I mean, you're in Variety, and I'm not joking, by the way, on that one. That is awesome that you're in Variety. There are times, by the way, Alex, is a little side note, where I will tell people that I know people like on movies, like no movies my mom will be watching or somebody else. I'm like, hey, I know that person. Like, how the hell do you know this person? I'm like, they talk to me because I have a podcast, and they go, they want to talk to you? I go, I don't know, I guess, yeah. But I was telling people, I'm like, I know this guy Alex Ferrari. He's in Variety. Like, Alex? Really? Is it one of those like? Because they it's one of those things where like, that's ridiculous. Everybody knows everybody. You know what I mean? Like, oh, sure, you know him. And I'm like, no, really, he's a friend of mine.
That's ridiculous. I can't believe you say things like this, Dave. It's ridiculous.
This is what my life is. Me just convincing. This is it. So Alex, with Ferrari versus Distributor, I think that's important because we're talking about making films and marketing films and all that stuff. So could you take us through your ride with how this all kind of came to be with where you're in Variety now talking about all this?
Yeah, so what happened was in late August, early September, I finally got a whiff of what was going on over at Distributor. Now, for people who don't know what Distributor was, it was a film aggregator, one of the larger ones, and one of the most prolific and visual ones. Like, they marketed like crazy, so they were everywhere. And Jason Brubaker from Filmmaking Stuff was, the VP of marketing, and his face was everywhere, and he was really deeply associated with the brand and the company as well. So a lot of people knew who Distributor was. But around that time, I realized that I got a whiff that something was going on, and I had submitted some films to Distributor about 4 months earlier for a client, and that I was consulting. And the movies hadn't been put up yet, and I'd paid for 5 platforms each movie, and it hadn't been put up yet. And I was like, "What's going on? What's going on?" And I knew everybody. I knew Jason. I knew Nick, the CEO. I knew Neil. I knew a bunch of people over there. And I'm like, I'm not getting responses. So if I'm not getting responses, what's the chance of a normal independent filmmaker who doesn't have these relationships getting response? So then I started digging a little bit more, and I realized that they were going through a quote-unquote reorganization. So when I heard that the company was going through a reorganization, I knew what that meant. That's code for I'm going bankrupt. So I said, oh, crap. So I reached out to people I knew who were close to the situation, and I found out the skinny. I was like, oh, my God, these guys are going under. They're going to screw thousands of filmmakers out of millions of dollars, and I'm sitting on this information. And it wasn't public yet. No, there was just rumblings. At that point, there was just rumblings from just an independent filmmaker here, an independent filmmaker there. They're like, hey, Distributor hasn't done anything. Hasn't done what they said they were going to do. I'm owed money. What's going on? I heard a couple of those things, and I was tagged on those things because I was a very big proponent of Distributor. I promoted them heavily because they helped me out 2.5 years ago with my first film, This Is Meg. So I felt responsible. First of all, I felt responsible because I wanted to say, look, I promoted the hell out of these guys. So I have this information. Now I feel that this is my responsibility to come out and say something about this publicly. And I did. And not only did I come out publicly, I came out with guns a-blaring. I was like, no. And the more I found out about it, the more that the story got deeper. I started getting calls from Deep Throat. I got calls from people that were like, hey, you can't use my name. But I'm like, oh, have I become like an investigative reporter all of a sudden? Like, oh my God, did I just break this story? I'm like, okay. So then every day that would go by, I would get more and more information. So then I would do these live Facebook video broadcast. And then I would release those on YouTube and on the podcast. And I just kept being, all of a sudden I was the poster child for this whole thing. And then I just, once the little bit of momentum got going, I went after them. I went after them very hard because there's nothing that pisses me off more than when filmmakers are taken advantage of. And this was blatant mismanagement, alleged fraud, alleged embezzlement. There's talks about all of that. There's criminal cases being brought up against certain people in the company, and alleged at this point. But there's obviously some mismanagement because millions of dollars is gone. I don't know where that money went, but it's gone. And the bottom line was that film aggregators in general are a middleman between you and the platforms. And the platforms, and the one that started this whole thing was Apple, was they empowered a small group of companies to take care of the technical stuff, meaning that they would take care of the encoding, make sure everything's cool, and be basically a middleman between the producer, distributor, and or independent filmmaker and their platforms. So Apple started it, and then everybody else kind of followed suit. So Amazon and Netflix and Hulu and all the other ones started doing the same thing. So you had to go through an aggregator. And I'm not just talking about filmmakers. Everybody has to go through an aggregator. That includes the studios. That includes big distribution companies. Everybody has to go through these things. But the big hiccup here was that the aggregators were responsible for the money. So the money would not go – the revenues that was generated from your title would go directly to the film aggregator, and then the aggregator would just spit it back out to the filmmakers or producers or distribution company. And they wouldn't take a cut because they're paid up front for their service. They're basically a post house. That's basically what they do. So with Distributor, all that money, all that revenue started coming in, but somebody started dipping their hand in that revenue money and started mismanaging it, whether that be through marketing, through elaborate spending, trips, whatever. I don't know the details. It's all alleged at this point. That was what happened. So slowly but surely, all the money started going away. And then when, from what I understood, Netflix, there were some producers from Netflix, because Netflix made Distributor a premier vendor, or what's it called? A preferred vendor. So there was like only two of the aggregators who had that status. So they were very high up. So basically, if you made a deal with Netflix, you had to go through Distributor. Netflix was forcing you to go through Distributor. So one day, one of these producers who had a Netflix deal called up Distributor and said, "Hey, where's our check?" And Distributor's like, "Oh, we didn't get it yet from Netflix." So then the producers called up Netflix and said, "Hey, where's the check?" And they said, "What are you talking about? We sent that check over to Distributor a month ago." And then all of a sudden, Netflix started doing investigation. They said, "Wait a minute." They called up Distributor and they said, "Are you not paying our filmmakers? Are you not paying the producers that we made deals with?" And that's when it all unraveled. And that was when the wheels fell off the wagon, and Distributor and the board of directors hired basically a bankruptcy firm to reorganize and deal with it's basically a going out of business firm. And the name of that firm was Glass Ratner. And then I've been very much involved with Glass Ratner ever since then, just being a middleman between them and the community, which I built out this Facebook group called Protect Yourself from Distributor. So all the information, everything that could happen was in there. So people was like posting left and right. We found out that they'd shut down their offices because somebody actually physically went there and told us about it. And then all this information would come in, and then I would do a broadcast basically telling everybody what was going on. Almost for a while there, it was like every week I was doing a new broadcast. And then I would be, so like for a minute, my podcast was just Distributor because it was such a big story. We're talking about millions, tens of millions of dollars gone, and thousands. Like I think the total was 2,000 filmmakers were impacted, and by the way, all their films were locked up too, so they couldn't even get access to their films again. And like, who was making the money? Because the movies are still up on the platforms, and money was coming in, but where was it going? Who was paying for it? It was just this. It was a nightmare. So that's basically where it all came up. And then I started reaching out to certain news outlets, and IndieWire was one of the first ones to say anything about it. So it was No Film School. And then after IndieWire, Variety showed up, and they did something. And then the big one was the LA Times. The LA Times showed up, and they did a deep investigative report on the whole thing. And I was kind of put up as the poster child for it. So, and I don't mind doing it. I don't mind doing it, being, the face of the situation. I just wanted filmmakers to be helped. And I'm still working behind the scenes with Glass Ratner and the powers that be to see how we can best help the filmmakers. So I've been advising them. I've been helping them. I've been relaying messages back and forth between the community and them, trying to make this transition as seamless as humanly possible. But there's no hope of getting the money back. That's gone. So there's going to be talk. There is talks about criminal charges being brought up because you can't do there's no money, so you can't civilly sue anybody. There's just no money to be made. So there's filmmakers. I know filmmakers who have lost $250,000,
Jesus.
$100,000, $150,000. I know these people personally. And they're suing. They're getting their attorneys together, and they're gonna go after the powers that be criminally at Distributor, because it's criminal what they've done. There's no question it's criminal what they've done. Not that let me rephrase. Is it criminal what they do in the term of did they do something that was criminal? It's alleged. But the mismanagement of the money is just the loose term is criminal. It's horrible is what they did. And someone has to pay for it. And if there was any fraud, if there was any embezzlement, those people need to be brought to justice. And they can't walk. They just can't walk. It's not right. And that kind of started me on a path to really become like a voice for independent filmmakers, trying to protect them and trying to help their plight as much as I possibly can. Because I feel that if you have a platform, even a small one, it's your responsibility to help the community that you're working with. It's, and that's what I'm doing. That's what I did and will continue to do. And I'm going after it even in a much bigger way, more and more every day. It's a major problem, and the whole system is corrupt. The whole distribution world is built to screw the filmmaker. It's been like that for generations, and the system needs to be brought down. The system needs to be broken up and destroyed, and something new has to come out of it, because filmmakers need to have the control back in their hands to be able to generate their own revenue and generate money from their art, and not be stolen from and abused like they are and have been for many, many, many years, which brought me to the writing of my book, which I was writing that book while this was going on. So I actually wrote in the book, I started writing about distribution, just kind of like I was only going to write a chapter about distribution, but I ended up writing 15,000 words. I was like, well, I got to break this up. So it just kind of spewed out of me. And then I have a whole a whole chapter on film aggregators and the concerns that I truly still have with film aggregation and the whole business model of film aggregation. So it's not looking very bright right now for filmmakers, but I do believe it is darkest before the dawn. So I hope that whatever I'm doing can help filmmakers in a way. But that is basically the whole Ferrari versus distributor thing.
Well, I could just imagine you, Alex, as like this investigative reporter. You got like a little hat on that says press, and you're just like, with one of those old-timey phones, and you're like, wow, what a scoop.
Wow, Dave, you need to get out, Dave.
Oh.
You need to get out.
This is all I got. This is it. So you already know I don't go on dates because the whole Tinder thing. So this
obviously. But that's basically what happened with Distributor, and it's still going on. It's not gone by any stretch. After the new year, there's going to be some new developments. There's things I'm working on behind the scenes that will hopefully help filmmakers and the people who have been affected. But I've done as much as I possibly can to help my community and bring and shine a light on what was going on. I did not want this to just go away, because that's what distributors and what Distributor wanted. They wanted this to just quietly go away, because the independent filmmaker by themselves generally don't have any power. Unless you're a rich one and have money to try to get attention on something like this, hire a PR firm or something like that, that they're powerless. And they know this. And distributors, that's part of their business model. They know that the normal independent filmmaker is not going to sue them for not getting paid. But I have a platform, and I have a light that I can shine on things if I don't want it to, if I don't like what's going on, and I'm using it for good. And that's the point of why I do what I do. I started off trying to help filmmakers, and I'm growing more and more in a larger and larger way trying to do that. So I hope that I've helped some filmmakers with what I did with Distributor, and hopefully will help more and continue.
Yeah, and see, you have such a great platform too, Alex, because you're like the film podcast. Because I mean, there's only there's you, there's filmmaking is hard, or making movies is hard. And there's like the kind of like those, you're up there with those guys and a couple of film podcasts, but you see, that's great, because you need a guy like you, Alex, down there fighting these companies who do stuff like this, because without that, I mean, like you just said, they would just be getting away with it, because they know most people don't have the money to hire a PR firm or whatever to go against them.
Exactly, and there is power in a platform, and that's what I've been able to create with Indie Film Hustle, with Filmtrepreneur, and with Bulletproof Screenwriting. I've been able to create a platform that gets attention, and I think it's my responsibility as the person who runs this platform to use that whatever little power I might have to help filmmakers and help the community as much as I can. And I know a lot of other platforms out there and a lot of other people out there, they're about the money, and they're only about the money. And don't get me wrong, I'm a businessman. I need to. This is my full-time job, but I lead with service, and I always led with service since I started this thing, and everything else follows afterwards.
Well, and see that's why you're so successful. I mean, you like we started off by saying you were the marketing, everything was on point from the get go. See, so
Thanks,
by the way,
man.
everyone, if you want to start a podcast, okay, mirror Alex, not me, but Alex. He's outlasted like every single one of us. So
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. I was just trying to keep up with you, sir. There was a moment there that you were I think at the 190s is where I was able to pass you, and you were like we were talking in our mastermind. You're like, you're almost to me, Ferrari. I don't know. I'm gonna start doing 2 a week like you. I don't know. I can't. Oh, forget it.
That is probably verbatim exactly what I said too. I was probably like, hell with it.
I can't. But that was the thing. When I launched the podcast, everybody else was doing 1 a week. So I was like, well, I'll do 2 a week because I'm crazy. And I did that for a long time. Actually, I just announced last week that I am, after the new year, going to go down to just 1 episode a week. Because I'm going to 1 episode of Indie Film Hustle, but then I also have an episode of Filmtrepreneur, and I also have an episode of Bulletproof Screenwriting. So I'm still between 2 to 3 episodes a week, but I'm dropping it down from 4. So in my world, that's a big deal that I'm pulling back 1 episode a week. Because I'm like, at this point, I'm working Indie Film Hustle's podcast. We're getting close to 400 episodes. And there's a lot of information out there. And anybody who just discovers the podcast, like yours, there's a wealth of a catalog there that they can go through. So I was like, I got to focus my energy on other things that, can grow my business and can be more impact on the community. And I don't think an extra podcast is a good, wise use of my time at this point. I need to start doing other things to make a larger impact, because I think I've done okay with the podcast, and I'm going to keep doing it, but just a little bit less, just slightly less.
Yeah, you're up to 365 episodes, Alex. My God.
Yes. It's stupid, sir. It's stupid.
And this is another thing. You're like, just like filmmaking. You're like, why the hell do I keep doing this podcast?
I don't know about you, but I actually did the podcast because I love now I truly just love having a place to speak my mind and that it affects people. But when I started getting email messages and IMs and meeting people out in the world and saying how much the podcast had changed their lives or helped them through something, or saved them money or made them money or got them to finish their movie after they had it sitting on the shelf for 2 years or whatever, that's the kind of stuff that feeds the soul. And I got addicted to that feeling. So that's one of the reasons why I keep doing. I mean, I run to my job every day. Every day I skip to my office because I'm with my little press hat on. I skip to my office because I'm just so excited to come and do what I do every day, because it's, at the end of the day, I'm being of service to my community, and it's no greater feeling, honestly.
I love that image, Alex, of you just getting up out of and just skipping down the hallway with a little press hat on, and you're going into your
there's little cartoon animals flying around me, and I whistle. So
yeah, and you're so, and then you get to your indie film lair, and you're like, all right, here we go. And then you're just all of a sudden you're getting a phone call on an old timey phone, and you're like, what's that, mayor? I'll be right there. Click, and you skip down to the mayor's office. And
I do. Apparently, I'm Adam West in your analogy, but sure, it's fine. It's fine. It works fine. Whatever makes it's good for you, sir.
And I really do appreciate, because I started this podcast because I wanted to just do something creative, and it's one of those things where I enjoyed it at first, just because the barrier to entry was so low. Even at that time, I was like, hell, I guess I could throw this together. Because at the time, I was involved in another podcast, and we actually had everything going for us, except for one thing, and that was I couldn't get people to show up to record it because we always did it in person. And it was like pulling teeth, Alex. I go for the
it's rough.
It is. And I'm like, guys, I have a studio, an actual freaking studio to do this in, and it's like, oh well, you know what, I can't make it to blah, blah, blah. I'm like, Jesus Christ, guys, come on. Like, you know, we agree on all this stuff, and I'm telling you, that's why I just said, let me get a microphone, no matter what the hell it is, connect it to my computer, and maybe somebody will talk to me. And at first everyone was like, you know, screw off, kid. And I said, yeah, that's how it usually works. But then people started talking to me, and then you made the mistake of talking to me, and now here we are. But
yes, exactly. By the way, your episode on my show, one of the most downloaded of all time, sir. So I just want you to know that.
I appreciate that so much, and I hope I helped somebody out with that. And I still get messages from people from time to time going like, "Hey Dave, I just heard about you on Alex's podcast," and I'm always so touched, dead serious when I hear stuff like that. I try to answer every single one of them. Sometimes they slip through the cracks, just because I get so many messages a day. But you know, I really do appreciate that. So anybody who, whether they found the story entertaining or you know, kind of like a cautionary tale, what's also I'm very happy about was a couple people that I was still friends with from that project deleted me on Facebook, and after the episode, and I said, good, I'm happy.
Yes.
So because you know why? Because I didn't mention names. So if somebody gets a little perturbed about something, maybe they felt a little guilty. But I'm not. You know what? Hey, you know, I didn't mention anybody by name. So you know, and I'm still friends with the majority of people I made that with. But there's a few people who I'm not friends with anymore on that, and that's fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So. But you know, just to, you know, again, we were talking about the rise of the Filmtrepreneur. You know, so Alex, you know, what is your process? I know we talked about on the last episode how you write a book. Or I'm sorry, I mean your day. I mean your whole daily process. So, you know, where do you fit this in, like on your schedule to actually write a whole book like this?
So when I wrote this book extremely fast. I was writing about 1,000 words a day, 1,500 words a day for a few weeks. It just exploded out of me. And then you know, I think the whole book ended up being around 55,000 words. So it took me about 3 months to write the whole thing, and I just started. Once I started, I couldn't stop. It just kept coming at such a fever pitch. Like Shooting for the Mob took me a lot longer. It took me a year to write that one. That was a lot more emotion involved, and it was the first time I was doing it, and it's just a whole other event at that point. But Rise of the Filmtrepreneur just kind of exploded out of me, and I do it in the morning. I just wake up in the morning, and when I'm writing a book, that'll be the first thing I do for about an hour every day. So it's not that big of a deal. I'll just sit down for an hour, and in an hour I can write anywhere between 800 and 1,500 words. It all depends on how fast I'm writing, but it's all stuff that was coming off the top of my head because it was all stuff that it was inside of me, just needed to come out, and that's generally the process.
So how much planning went into this? I mean, like, I know you said you wrote it pretty fast, but, you know, how much planning did you do? Did you actually, like, map out, like, exactly, like, an outline for the whole book?
Yeah. Usually when I write in general, I always outline. So, but that was a rough outline. So I just kind of understood, like, some of the chapter points I wanted to go into. But then as I was writing, I'm like, well, there's another chapter. Well, there's another chapter. Like the distribution, when I wrote 15,000 words of distribution, that broke up into like 6-7 chapters. So it was just, well, I'm like, we got to talk about TVOD, and we have to talk about VOD. Okay, then we got to talk about predatory film distribution techniques, and we got to talk about this, and then we got to talk about that, and we got to do about four-walling, and we got to do about regional cinema model, and we've got to do about event screenings, and there was just so much to dig into with distribution that I broke up it just to a lot of things. But that wasn't the plan. Originally, I was just going to write like a chapter on distribution, and it ended up being like 7 chapters of distribution. So it's a starting point. And then as I start writing, then things will start coming up. And I'm like, oh, that's another chapter. Oh, that's another chapter. We ended up being, I think, 33 chapters in total in the book. But yeah, that's basically the route I go.
So, you know, earlier on you were talking about how things are looking a little bleak, and it's darkest before the dawn in terms of aggregators. So you know, where do you see things going? I mean, do you see Netflix hanging around? You know, with all the remakes and the reboots and the superhero movies, you know, taking up theaters. You know, most of these original movies aren't going to be seen, and the studios aren't going to make most of these movies. So what do you think? Do you think that most of these movies now, like Netflix, is kind of like the last kind of hope out there?
All right. So what's the question exactly? Is it about what's the future for independent filmmaking, or what's the future in media in general?
For independent film.
So for independent filmmakers, I truly believe that the only way to make this work outside of a studio scenario is being a filmtrepreneur. It's being an entrepreneurial filmmaker, because we are going through a very large shift in our industry. This exact same shift happened in publishing, then it was followed by the music industry, and now it's happening in our industry, where there's a devaluation of the media. So books originally, to buy a book, it cost how much? It would cost $25 for a hardcover, and then after 6 or 8 months, they release it on paperback for a little less, and that was basically how it went for decades. But then ebooks showed up, and then audiobooks showed up, and then all of a sudden the value of that information started to drop, where now then audiobooks are being handed out like candy and being bootlegged, and ebooks were being bootlegged, and then all of a sudden the industry couldn't control it anymore, and then Amazon came in and controlled everything because they were the 8,000-pound gorilla. So that happened in the publishing industry. Then the music industry, the exact same thing happened, where before to get your favorite song that was on the radio that you heard for free, you had to go buy an album, and that album would generally cost anywhere between $15 to $17. It could be on tape, or it could be on vinyl, or then eventually CD. But that was the model that the music industry had taken. Then occasionally they would release singles and things like that, but that was it. But then this little thing called the MP3 showed up and changed the whole game. So the technology devalued the media. So all of a sudden now I can download illegally the entire catalog of the Beatles in under an hour. Something that used to cost that, trying to buy the catalog of the Beatles, we're going to talk a few $100. Mm-hmm. Now it's free. So now there's a devaluation of that media. That's what's happening with film. So before, you had to what was the process to go to access a film? You had to go to the theater. Mm-hmm. And that was the only way you can get entertained. Then TV showed up, and TV basically gave it away for free. But it wasn't first run stuff. It was, TV shows and that whole thing, but it wasn't first run films. You would get films from like decades ago or something like that. But then that started to shake up things. Then in the 80s, VHS showed up, completely changed things. Then all of a sudden the price to get a movie was, look, it's only $3 to rent it, or $1 to rent it. You didn't have to go spend all that money. Then after VHS, DVD showed up, and then there was regular VHS and sell through VHS, and all of a sudden you could own a movie for $20. So if you wanted to buy E.T., you could buy it for $15, $20. If you bought it used, you could buy it for $5 used on VHS. Then DVD showed up, and there was still a cost involved with accessing that media. To access that content, you still have to pay there was a cost involved, and the value of that cost was going down, but it was still there. So you had to buy a DVD, you had to buy a Laserdisc, you had to buy a Blu-ray. There weren't other options. But then streaming showed up. And once streaming showed up, that changed the game. All of a sudden, YouTube showed up. And now we're able to watch free video anytime we want instantly. Then Netflix showed up with movies and TV shows. And that changed our habits. So now we have generations have grown up with the expectation of their media being free or part of a bundle or subscription model. So now what would have cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to have at the tip of my fingers of, let's say I wanted to have 40,000 titles. That would have cost me millions of dollars to have all those DVDs or Blu-rays, correct? Now, for $12.99, it's mine. So what is each of those titles worth anymore? It's worth fractions of a penny. Fractions of a penny. That's what the value is. The same thing happened in the music industry with Spotify. Once they started streaming every song ever, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Spotify, those places, the value of the music, of the content, is nothing. It's essentially free. We're talking about fractions of pennies. So that's what's happening in the industry, the film industry right now. And distribution companies don't know what's going on. The studios that will survive, and I don't think all of them will. The studios that will survive have been able to do so and will do so because of the diversification of revenue streams, of income streams. And Disney's the king of this, and Disney will probably be able to withstand any hit because they have an infrastructure that is nobody has an infrastructure like that Disney, just nobody. Being able to monetize all of their content without only relying on the exploitation of the content, because before that was enough. Before record sales was enough to be able to support an artist and a record company for that matter. Now, the music itself is worthless. It's now a marketing tool to sell tickets for live events, T-shirts, merch, sponsorship deals. That's where the money is. And the same thing's happening in the film industry. So because I was just at AFM a few weeks ago, and the distributors are lost. All their income streams are drying up from the traditional model. So they're becoming more predatory. They're screwing filmmakers more and more left and right because they're just desperate. They have no other option. They're trying to figure things out. And as soon as they figure something out, it changes. As soon as they say, oh, this is the new way, it's gone now, and now we're moving somewhere else. It's changing so rapidly that the industry itself doesn't know what to do. So we're in a major point of flux right now in the business. And the only hope we have is, I personally believe, is being an entrepreneurial filmmaker, being a filmtrepreneur. And the concept behind being a filmtrepreneur is creating a product for a niche audience at a low cost and creating ancillary product lines and services that you can sell to that audience. So where it becomes that the movie almost becomes a loss leader to sell your merch. This is not new technology. This is not a new concept. I mean, George Lucas did this with Star Wars. He's like, the money's in the lunchboxes, idiot. Disney, literally Walt Disney started this whole thing when he sold the first Mickey Mouse doll. It was based off of a short film that he released. And he still makes money. The Walt Disney Company makes money every second of every day selling something that has Mickey Mouse on it. Or has something that says Snow White on it. And that was a movie that was made in 1937. And they're still monetizing it. That's how independent filmmakers need to do it. And the only way they can do that on a scale that makes sense for them is by niching down, by finding an audience and building a product for that audience. And that could be art house, that could be horror, that could be surfers, that could be filmmakers, that could be vegans, that could be any of those things. But that's the future. That is the curation of media is where the future is, where you're finding that you can't make something for everybody at this stage, at this level of budget and of what we're able to do as independent filmmakers. You can't make a broad comedy and expect to make any money with it. Not in today's world, and definitely not in tomorrow's world. But could you make a comedy about skateboarding, or make a comedy about smoking weed? Or those are niches that you can focus on. And if you do it for a smart number, then you can become successful with it. But that's what the book is basically about. It's about teaching you how to think differently about making movies.
Well, you mentioned AFM, and I want to just ask you a quick follow-up question about that. I had a friend who went about, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little more, and he said even then that distributors were kind of like, up in the air, and he said he also noticed something else, that some people had a product or like a movie that was just a ripoff of like Thor, for instance. He said guys would have
sure.
And he goes, how do people that not that self-aware, they didn't just pitch a movie. He's like, they spent money actually making this thing or a trailer or whatever, being that unself-aware. Did you see more of that this year?
Oh, well, yeah, it's becoming more and more schlocky, and it's becoming more and more foreign dependent. So AFM this year was much more about foreign buyers. It was foreign buyers coming in from around the world, and less about domestic buyers, because the world is the only market that's still growing, really. and there's somewhat of an appetite for these films out there. But even then, the game is changing so rapidly, they have no idea what to do. They just have no idea what to do. And because of their desperation, filmmakers are paying even worse. I mean, if I told you some of the deals I heard, because I was stopped every 3 minutes at AFM from somebody, a filmmaker or someone. It was actually really insane. I was recognized a lot this year, and it's probably because of the distributor thing. And I would always ask them, "Hey, what are you here with? How can I help?" I was always trying to be of service to whoever I met. And they would tell me these deals like, "Yeah, I'm meeting with this distributor." I'm like, "Don't use them. Stay away from them." And they're like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yep." "Who else are you meeting with?" "Nope, they're okay. I heard good things about them, but nope, don't use them." And I would hear these stories of the deals that they were being offered, and they were just the most predatory things I'd heard some doozies, but when you hear a story of like it's a 20-year deal and it's a $50,000 marketing cap with no money up front. By the way, that $50,000 is yearly, so it's $1 million in advertising over a course of 20 years, and no money up front, and they basically own the movie, worldwide rights, with no money up front. That was a deal.
Well, I actually had this guy that I knew. He made some movies in the area here in the Philadelphia area, and one of the movies he made was kind of like this futuristic space type dealy thing. Obviously lots of green screen. And I knew some of the actors in it, and I didn't think much of it. And, he got like, a couple of actors, like of name actors to appear in a scene so he could put them on the cover art. You know how that old thing works. So later on, I'm talking to the actors that I know, and I said, how was that? It looked like there was, it had everything together. And this girl who helped him produce it, she said to me, "Dave, it turned out to be a train wreck." And she goes, he only got one distribution offer, which was a 7-year deal in Japan for $1,500 total.
And that was only for Japan?
Only for Japan.
I would have taken that deal.
I don't know
if it was just for Japan, I would have taken that deal. That's just one territory. As long as you have the territories for the rest of the world, you're fine. And they were actually going to pay him money, I would have taken that deal.
Well, $1,500. That's it. So $1,500.
And how much was the
for 7 years?
How much was the movie? How much did the movie cost?
That I don't know.
Okay,
but I can tell you.
So a deal like that for that kind of territory in today's world is not bad. It's one territory, and Japan's not the largest territory, so I would have taken that deal, but because it was just Japan. And as long as they had no rights of Japan, like you can't exploit your rights in Japan, so it's very difficult. So if you make any money in a foreign territory, it's a blessing. I was making a lot more money. When I sold This Is Meg, I was getting territories that were paying me $5,000. $5,000 for a whole territory. It's fine, but it also depends on the movie. So if that movie cost $300,000, and the only offer they got was from a Japanese distributor, well, that's horrible.
Well, that's what I mean. Like that's the only offer they got. So that was it. That was, and I guarantee you, it was probably close to. I mean, I'm guessing it was somewhere between $50,000 to maybe $150,000.
Sure.
So that's why, and I said, you know what? When I heard that, I said, I feel very, very bad for that person. I don't want to ever, unless the person, absolutely is a piece of shit. I don't want to ever, bury anybody. But I was like, damn, that's awful. But I just bring that up because that's what we're talking about here about these deals.
Yeah.
And then also my friend, again, just to bring him up, my friend was like, when he went to AFM, he was like, hey, look, they have a picture. They literally have a Thor knockoff, but they're not. But they're not actually trying to make it like a Thor knockoff. Nor is it it's not an homage. It's not a parody. It's literally like they're so. They're just piggybacking off the Thor marketing. Exactly. They do that all the time. There's Asylum has built their entire business around that, and so did Roger Corman.
Instead of Jurassic Park, there was Carnosaur.
But don't you think it was easier for them to do? Like, I always think when like two guys want to do something like that, I'm always like, don't you think you could have spent that money on something better, like Roger Corman or Asylum? I've had
but they have those infrastructures in place. They have those relationships in place. So when they make those movies are already sold. If an independent's trying to do that, forget it, man. You can't do something like that. It's too difficult. It's too difficult.
So here's my pitch to you about a movie, okay? Forget the X-Men. We're going to make the Z-Men, okay?
Okay. Yeah, Marvel. Disney's lawyers are already calling.
Oh, yeah, they're actually shutting me down right now, and they own my house.
Yeah, and so instead of Cyclops, the lasers come out of their ears. Instead of Wolverine, we have a badger. It's just a...
You got it. See, now you're on the train with this. See?
You see? I'm just saying. I think it's genius. It's genius, sir. Genius.
So instead of like Professor X, he's still in a wheelchair, but he just communicates through a box like Stephen Hawking.
And he's Professor Y.
Exactly.
Of course. Why wouldn't he?
Exactly. See, this whole thing writes itself, Alex. You see this?
I understand, sir. I understand. For the attorneys of the Walt Disney Company who are listening to this, I have no association with this project, nor do I endorse this in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Nobody ever see that's one of the things we always talk about, Alex, is you got to try to warn people about stuff like this. So like, if there's a friend out there who's like, hey, I got this idea for a movie, I'm like, just when people ask me questions, like because I not to your what you get, the massive emails you get, but whenever somebody asks me a question, like someone will email me or they'll see me in person. A friend, there's this guy I bumped into, and he said, Dave, I got this idea, my friend has this idea for a film, and we want to go out in the woods and shoot this, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, does this sound like something that's feasible to do? Like, I'm trying to explain to these people that it's not just picking up your iPhone and going out into the woods and then hoping to sell this damn thing. Like, there's so much more involved into this, and plus you want to make something original that's just not some knockoff of something somebody's already seen like 100 times. So that's why whenever, you know what is a good kind of analogy or good example to use, Alex, is when I tell people about zombie films. Like, there's so many zombie films out there. I always tell people, if you can think of anything kind of clever, the last clever zombie film I saw was called The Battery. Did you see that?
I did not.
Check that out. That's a great film. That's a great zombie film.
Okay, good to know.
So, so that was just my point, though. It's like, if you're going to do something, you want to do something like that, or just try to do anything to be different. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And the zombie genre is a genre that you could do some really good business in. You make a good movie for a certain budget, a smart number. You put a different swing or angle, because zombie movies are large. It's a large, there's horror movies, and then there's a zombie niche. But you can actually niche down even farther than that and make it a specific kind of zombie film, so you can try to niche it even more and make it for a smart number. You could do very, very well with that. And you could piggyback on the popularity of Walking Dead. You can create a podcast about or content wrapped around The Walking Dead, build an audience. I talk about this in the book. Build an audience around zombies. And then when, after 6 months of doing that, all of a sudden you go, hey guys, I'm making a zombie movie. Do you want to crowdfund it with me? Great. You raise $5 or $10,000 off the audience that you've been able to build because you've been giving them a lot of value in the zombie genre. And all of a sudden that audience will probably be interested in seeing what you do, because you've become an authority, a thought leader in the zombie genre, purely by having a podcast about The Walking Dead, for instance. And then you make your movie for $10,000-$15,000, which you're now in the black on. And then now you sell it directly to your audience. You also go around to horror conventions and you sell merch, a lot of different kind of merch. You put the movie on VHS and you sell it as a zombie special edition VHS, and you sell those VHSs for $30 a pop, because that audience, that niche, loves horror movies. And then not loves horror movies, but loves physical media. So you can sell that all day, and you can go on tour around the country to these different horror conventions selling your wares. And if you sell 100 T-shirts in one event over a weekend and you sell them for $25, you can make $2,500 off that. And could you make a DVD and add that in there for $35? Do you think they would buy it at a horror convention? Absolutely. Now you've made $3,500. And if you crowdfunded it from an audience that cost you nothing to make, well, hell, man, that's a business. Is that not a business? And you do that 4 or 5 times, and all of a sudden you have a sustainable bunch of revenue coming in off of a genre that you love. That's one instance.
No, that's a very good idea, Alex. I wish I would have thought of that beforehand, but here we are.
Read the book, sir. Read the book.
Yeah, I will have to pick up a copy of it. I admit I haven't picked up a copy yet. I will pick one up.
Well, it just came out. It just came out a couple days ago, so you're okay. If in 2 weeks you have not picked it up, sir, we're gonna have an issue.
Well, I the last time we had you on, I actually read your book that I was halfway through it, so actually I knew I was a little more prepared. But
yes, no problem.
But yeah, I know the book just came out, and I'm going to link to that in the show notes. At DaveBullisPodcast.com. Alex, we've been talking for about an hour. Is there anything you want to say to sort of put a period at the end of this whole conversation?
Well, there's first and foremost, there's multiple things that I have going on I would love to talk to your audience about right now because I'm a hustler and that's what I do. So obviously the book, Filmtrepreneur, Rise of the Filmtrepreneur is available at www.filmbizbook.com. Takes you there and you can buy it on Amazon, Audible. It has audiobook, paperback, and ebook. And I have a new movie coming out called On the Corner of Ego and Desire. Comes out January 21st, 2-3 days before Sundance. It's a film about filmmakers trying to sell their movie at Sundance. And I think we've spoken about that before as well on the last episode. So that's coming out, and you can go to egoanddesirefilm.com. Indie Film Hustle TV, which is a streaming service dedicated to film education, real-world film education, as well as movies about the filmmaking process and screenwriting as well. And then my main websites, indiefilmhustle.com, filmtrepreneur.com, and bulletproofscreenwriting.tv for all the screenwriters. And I could talk more and more about other things I'm doing, but that's a good, comfortable way to finish that. But I heard through the grapevine, sir, that this might be the final episode of the Dave Bullis podcast.
Yes. You've heard correctly.
Oh, it saddens me, sir. It saddens me. I'm first of all humbled that you had me on as your last guest. So that means a lot to me. And like we said earlier before we were recording, you were one of the last standing podcasts from the original crew that we had our membership, our mastermind with. So Indie Film Academy stopped. Scott stopped with Film Trooper. Chris at Film Festival Secret stopped. So you and I were the only last 2 dogs standing in this fight, and it just kept. I always had the Bullis. I knew the Bullis was always there, man. Now the Bullis will be no longer, and I am saddened by that. But you've done how many episodes are you up to?
Like 220 something.
That's a lot of freaking episodes, man. That's an insane amount of episodes. But listen, man, I wish you nothing but the best, and I'm so glad that you did this. I hope you got some value out of doing it. But I am humbled that you had me on as the last guest, man. It really is.
Well, it's kind of poetic in a way. It is because it's like you're the guy who when I actually started this before Jason. I started this before Jason Buff, Scott McMahon, all those guys. I actually started my podcast. And
what year did you start?
2014.
Wow, I started a year later. That was 2015.
Yeah, because that's when I met Scott, and Scott and I started talking, and then he was like, "Hey, there's this guy Alex Ferrari," and it's always funny. I know we always talk about Jason Buff, but it's like he just like disappeared off the face of the planet one day. I almost want to say that there was no Jason Buff, and it was just like how they
figment of our imagination.
You know how they say Shakespeare was kind of like a combination of people, and there was no real William Shakespeare. I kind of feel that same way about Jason Buff. There's no real. He was just like this combination of people, and they just got tired of pulling the gag.
Exactly.
Like Tony Clifton when
he's the Tony Clifton of indie film. I love it.
Because like
I hope Jason's listening. Please send this to the people who formed Jason. Please send this to them.
They'll be like, damn it, how the hell did he know it was us? How the hell did he know? But again, Alex, I mean, it was just very good talking with you, and I'm glad, again, just that you could be the final episode. I think this was a great way, and it's a great time too for me to kind of put this. It's a period at the end of the conversation of the whole podcast. So I usually say that question to kind of wrap up everything with each guest, but I think it's a very good way. There's a lot of content, by the way. I'm going to be taking every episode down too. I'm not going to leave it up there.
Are you?
Yeah, there's a reason for that.
Why?
I'll tell you off air. I'll tell you why.
There's always a story with you, sir. There's always a story.
I know. That's why. Seriously, I live my life like a 14-year-old teenage girl. Okay, there's always drama. There's always a horror story.
So is your website going to go down as well?
It will. Everything.
Oh my God! You're like, why? But why?
I'll tell you off the air.
You're killing me. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to get it out of him, but he just won't say it.
It's a funny story, but it's also like I have my reasons, and I think it's a kind of a good place for me to kind of take a step back. And here's the thing though, I'm gonna encourage everybody, just follow Alex. He's the trailblazer.
Thank you so much.
Seriously, if you're listening to this, there's only one of us standing left, and it's Alex. So please, if one of us can at least succeed, that's all that matters. And I'm glad at least that one of us could succeed. Alex is always taking step forwards, and that's why it's been so fun to not only be his friend and see all this, but it's just been like blown away. Like when I said earlier, I was like, hey, telling people like, hey, I know these guys, or whatever. Like people like, really? I'm like, yes. So it's always funny, man. So it's but Alex, I wish you nothing but the best. And if I do decide to come back on social media or whatever, you'll be one of the first people that I email and be like, hey, Alex, I'm back. What's up, buddy?
Yes, exactly. And then I'll have my assistant to block you. But
wouldn't be the first time, buddy. Wouldn't be the first time.
Swipe left, sir. Swipe left. No, I'm joking. No. Anytime, Dave. It has been a pleasure knowing you, and we've walked over the same dead corpses in the film industry during the time that we've been doing this in the podcast. So I appreciate you, man, and I appreciate everything you've done for the community up to this point, and I wish you nothing but the best in your future endeavors, brother. So thank you again for having me back on the show and honoring me with the last episode of the Dave Bullis podcast. May it rest in peace. Much love, sir.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.